David Cay Johnston. Thank you, David, for being here.
Hello, Mark. So you're sleeping in these days?
I guess. Yes. Actually, I was up at 5:45 this morning, but it's nice to have another hour just to kind of review, what's going on in the world. Hey, are you going to be on MS? I thought I saw that somewhere on Twitter.
Well,
Is that
two
right?
things. I was on last night with Stephanie Rule in the 11th hour, and I will be on Joy Reid tonight, as of now, in the first block at 7 p.m.
And what do they most focus on now on MS? I mean, like what when they bring you on, what is the area in which they really kind of most drill down
Well,
on?
I think the big issue that's come up is Trump's use of donations to finance his legal fees. As I pointed out last night, do you remember 8 years ago, Donald claimed he was worth more than $10 billion. If that's the case and he only earned a modest 5% return, that would mean he has $500 million a year of economic gain before taxes. And of course, we know from his tax returns, he finds ways to not pay taxes. So why would he need to raise money for legal defense? And so far this year, his PACs have spent apparently $40 million. Now, $40 million by any standard is a lot of money, but compared to what a presidential campaign costs, it's a drop in the bucket. And remember when Donald announced 8 years ago, on June 16th of 2015, he said he wasn't going to take any campaign contributions because he was so rich he could finance his campaign on his own. So the issue going forward is not just, does Donald have the money? He doesn't. It's, is it legal? Can he use money? Well, there are PACs and there are super PACs, and the laws governing them are different. But I don't see any reason that Trump couldn't set up a separate, like, GoFundMe campaign, because you can give $18,000 a year if you're a married couple. That would be, or $17,000 this year, so $34,000 if you're a married couple, to anybody, and there's no tax implication to you, and the other person gets the money tax-free. But I suggested last night that if there was a public good to come out of this, look at Carlos de Oliveira, a manager of the Mar-a-Lago property, but not a sophisticated man, someone who was doing what the boss said to do. He lives in a rented apartment, so that tells you he's not a rich man. And Trump through his aide, Walt Nauta, asked him to do things, and he did them. Well, right now, his lawyers are being paid for by Donald Trump. And while a lawyer's professional obligation, it used to be at law school, they taught ethics. They don't do that anymore. They now teach professional responsibility, which I think is a not insignificant change. The lawyer's duty is to his client, not to Mr. Trump, but let's live in the real world about how this works. So one of the things I suggested is if people set up a GoFundMe type fund and ask people to contribute it, so that Mr. de Oliveira could get his own separate counsel unrelated to Trump, he might understand that it could be very much in his benefit to turn state's evidence and could avoid a prison sentence.
Such a great point. And as I recall, David, was it Kaylee Hutchinson who had that same thing where she started with a Trump attorney and they said, you'll work with him.
Cassidy Hutchinson.
Cassidy, yes, thank you.
Yes, that's exactly right. She started out with Trump lawyers, and she's a very bright individual. And immediately she recognized this was the wrong path to go down. And I suspect it's been very financially troubling for her. Lawyers are not cheap. There are lots of lawyers out there who charge $1,500 an hour.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. This is the old way in which the government could make life tough for you, right? They bring charges, you need to get a lawyer, and you could end up in some penurious state as a result of just having to deal. Oh yeah,
you can end up losing your house and everything else. And clearly, getting some. Let me back up. There's a point at which prosecutors will offer deals to people who can provide the government with useful information in a criminal prosecution. But if you lie to them, and that's one of the accusations against Carlos de Oliveira, or you don't take the offer at the time, then you may lose that opportunity. And the net result of that is you can end up going to prison. And the fact is, we've had 2 attorney generals of the United States go to prison, John Mitchell and Richard Kleindienst, who were appointed both by Richard Nixon. And people around Trump need to wise up and recognize that if you've got information, you should get yourself to the prosecutors if you want to eliminate the risk you're going to be prosecuted. You're under the law, you can make what's called a proffer to them, and the government say we're not interested, but they can't use that against you if they decide to pursue you.
That's right. Eileen says the Trump lawyers told Cassidy the less she remembered, the better. That's right.
And this is an I'm sorry, Mark.
No, I was just and it's nothing. Katie said that penurious is a ding word, which is true. Okay, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
It's an old habit and practice of Donald's. I mean, we're seeing Donald doing things today that he's used in the past, claiming that financial records, and in this case, national security and other records and videotape, were ruined by water and flooding. He did that when he was audited by the city of New York, which eventually established that he was cheating the city out of about $2.5 million for the year in rents he owed the city. He has in the past had all sorts of witnesses on his behalf in casino matters, in employment discrimination matters, and other matters who I don't recall. And credibility in those things matters a great deal. So I don't see any legal reason that somebody couldn't set up a fund and say, if you want to turn state's evidence against Donald Trump, here's a fund that will help you pay for lawyers and help you get directed to competent lawyers. And Donald's using one other technique. When Carlos de Oliveira showed up at the Miami courthouse, he was not arraigned. Arraignment is where you are formally told the charge. It can be read to you, or a judge can ask questions to establish you understand the sum and substance of it. Because he said he couldn't find a lawyer. He had one from Washington, D.C. Give me a break. Miami, corrupt drug trade, financial misconduct, Miami, you can't find a local lawyer. This is simply another stalling and delaying tactic by Donald Trump. The good thing about this is may work in Judge Eileen Cannon's jurisdiction. It is not going to work in Washington, D.C.
Right. That was the key decision that was made to move it to that Florida venue, which many thought was just a real problem. I mean,
and there's a reform we need, Mark, and that is judges are supposed to be assigned through a random number generator, a variation of that. It's a wheel spins, and you get Judge Thompson, the next person gets Judge Johnston. Right. We have these courthouses with one federal judge, the judge in Amarillo, Texas, who's made some just awful decisions that are totally ideological. Judge Cannon, who literally wrote last summer in a ruling that Donald Trump deserves special treatment, which is, that ought to be grounds right there to impeach her, except she wouldn't be convicted in the Senate. We need to eliminate one judge jurisdictions. If a case comes up in the Southern District of Florida, you shouldn't be able to shop by going directly to Judge Cannon. You should get a random number generator from the Miami main courthouse. And whoever you get, you get.
It's interesting. You were talking about that's the legal side of it. And you touched on the money side of it with Trump. And then we'll move on quickly. But David Cay Johnston, you just are so good with Trump stuff that I thought it was interesting that, as you suggested, $40 million goes to his legal needs. That was reported, but there was also this report that his that they wanted a refund. I believe they're paying legal bills, and they're paying so much in legal bills that they're looking to get $60 million in contributions that they made to another group supporting Trump back into Trump coffers to cover legal fees. That was from the New York Times.
Right.
$60 million refund request shows financial pressure on Trump from legal fees.
Right. And all of this goes to a fundamental truth about Donald. He is not now, never has been a billionaire. He's a wealthy man. I don't want to mislead people about that. But my former colleague, Tim O'Brien, in his book, Trump Nation, Trump showed him his financial documents and allowed him to go through them and his tax returns. And Tim, against my advice, said Trump's net worth at the time was between 140 and 160 million dollars, which fit exactly what I thought. I told Tim, if you put in a specific number, Trump will sue you. And lo and behold, he did. But thank goodness he did, because Trump got nowhere, and we got all sorts of great testimony out of Trump about his lies and manipulations. But Trump is always desperate for money. In the book that made him well known in America, The Art of the Deal, which was reviewed by people who either didn't read it or read it with incredibly gullible eyes, he basically describes how he is a serial con artist. And the art of the deal is, I fleeced you, Mark, out of all your money. I don't care. There's another person down the street. I'm going to fleece him and that company, and just one after another. You just keep going. And he's unfortunately now not in the same situation. He's being very closely watched. There are a lot of big donors in the Republican Party who are holding back on everybody, not just Trump. And he's going to have, as I predicted a long, long time ago, a real cash crisis over all of this. And just watch, the day will come when he's going to say, well, the government's trying to bankrupt me so that I'll roll over and play dead. Well, I'm sorry, you said you had $10 billion. How could you possibly be bankrupted? You might have to sell a golf course or a hotel, but really?
Yeah, don't bring facts into an argument with Trump. And in fact, I mean, something that it would seem against all logic is the more there's talk of indictment, the more that indictments come forward, the more money he does raise, and the more he actually goes up in polling. National polling, shows that he's had a pretty good week since the Target indictment letter, et cetera. David, he thrives, it would seem, in this world of conflict.
He does, but let me suggest two things. Early polls, we're 16 months out from a presidential election, are not very revealing. There's plenty of evidence that those things were not useful. Secondly, there's a pollster here in Rochester, New York, where I live, known mostly for his commercial work, but he does political work, named Geraci. And he wrote a book called Polled. And it's about how polls have become unreliable because less than 1 in 100 people who answer the phone will sit through the poll. And I will tell you, as someone who, when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I made extra money on the side doing poll work, and mostly commercial product rather than, do you like this brand versus that brand? And one of the things I learned was, it is so easy to steer people. It's just not
It's all
difficult
how you ask a question, right? Sure, that's such a great
and
point.
just the tone of your voice, or whether you're smiling or licking, growling, can have an enormous influence on people's answers.
Yeah.
And so you tend to get people who are lonely, want to talk to somebody on the phone, sort of thing, and they're not reliable. The reliable measure is, are donors supporting you? And you just saw Ron DeSantis cut a third or more of his staff. Donors are not supporting him. And what you're seeing among the Republicans, Tim Scott, Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, maybe Nikki Haley, although all the racists, of course, don't want her, is an effort to position themselves so that if and when Trump ceases to be viable, they can step forward.
It's interesting, DeSantis, and then I want to get to a question from our chat. DeSantis did shed all of those staffers, as you suggest. And the other thing that's happened with DeSantis that was interesting is that he's topped out in terms of donors. That, a lot of his donor money comes from big donors, and I guess they've topped out in terms of their ability to give him any more money. But he does have still a lot, but he's not turning it into any kind of numbers that would seem to matter at all.
Barbie, in its opening extended weekend, the way they count box offices worldwide, raised about twice as much money as DeSantis has raised in 11 years. 11 years.
Wow, that's a statistic you will not see too many places. James says, why is a criminal defendant, David Cay Johnston, allowed to pay the legal fees for a witness? Isn't this
James,
witness tampering?
James, that is the question of the hour.
Yeah.
You are allowed to have something called a coordinated defense plan and to talk to one another. And these are conspiracy cases. So that's the reason that you can do that. I think the corollary question is, why is it not a conflict of interest for a judge you appointed to the bench to try your case? Trump appointed Eileen Cannon. And hopefully when we get past all of this, public support will continue to demand some fundamental ethical reforms involving the law. One of my favorite little annoyances in life is a government will send you a notice saying, you didn't do this on your property, or, you're in violation of this regulation and pay this fine. But if you go to the same agency and say, okay, is it okay to do this? They won't respond. They'll say, well, we're not in the business of giving legal advice. So you go pay for legal advice and they can still say, no, you're wrong. I mean, we really need to make government of the people much more than it is.
I wish I could put that on a bumper sticker. I mean, that is so right on. I feel as though government has drifted in our last minute. I just feel our government has drifted, and maybe our system has drifted from its ability to represent the people and the people's voice. Yeah. And there is an effort by those in power, David, I see it repeatedly, to remain in power and no longer reflect the people's voice, but reflect, obviously, the wishes of their donors. Or
the campaign finance reforms after Watergate have backfired. And members of Congress and the Senate and state legislatures, they don't like the groveling to raise money, but they're also risk averse and they're not willing to do anything. Before we go, I just want to leave two things with your audience. Yeah. Pay close attention to what's going on in the Ukraine war. The Ukrainians are getting closer to cutting off Crimea, the territory that in 2014 was seized by the, quote, little green men of the Russian government. That's one. I think you're going to see some important things happen very soon in this war. Secondly, pay attention also to the news about China. China, like the United States, has monopoly control of its currency, the renminbi, and can borrow in its own currency. So the national government can't go broke. But all the economic statistics coming out of China and Russia, not that you can rely on them, all of them are pointing to really, really serious problems coming. Putin has used up almost all of his foreign currency reserves. He's got, he's getting revenue through smuggling and things like that. And you can't run a government that size in a country of almost 50 million people. And in China, the mismanagement of the debt by the Communist Party is causing problems. And I think both of these are going to loom larger in the next year, 2 years ahead.
Hey, David, you mentioned that's great. And actually, it's very interesting because I piled up some articles that I wanted to read anyway. One is about the weakening of Russia's economy because of the war, and the other is about the rise of China. So I'd love to even pick up on that a bit with you next time. What would you have done when the whole Crimea situation exploded on Barack Obama, when they first took over Crimea, Russia did?
Well, Obama could have acted much more forcefully, but he did not have support in Congress. The Republicans made it eminently clear that they were going to go after him if he did much about this. And
so he made the political calculation that it would be too difficult politically?
Yeah, he was very cautious about a lot of things. I mean, remember, nobody went to prison over all of the financial crimes.
Yeah.
They made a political decision that rebuilding the economy was more important. Then he agreed to take about 40% of his proposed stimulus and turn it into tax cuts for business to appease the Republicans, which is anti-stimulus. And so I think, Obama was not willing to go to the mat for things, and he didn't have the support in Congress to do things. But looking back, sure, it was a mistake. I said it was a mistake at the time. And remember, this was the first time since the end of World War II that a European government used force to seize the territory of another government.
To be fair to Obama, I mean, it was definitely an inflection moment, potential flashpoint.
Yeah.
To be fair to Obama, and you know, it's tough because I feel, as you say, that he was, you know, he said all the right things, but then policy-wise, he seemed to, you know, tap out and give in to a lot of things. But on the Crimea thing, so do you push back with force? This is, and I ask this because I think it's instructive for the future as well. You know, we're loath to get involved in a military situation, but
you don't want to get into a military confrontation with a nuclear power. But one of the things that we've seen is that in the past, diplomatic expulsions and sanctions have all been cosmetic and had no real effect. I mean, they're annoying to the individuals involved. The Biden administration, together with European governments, has actually put the first effective economic sanctions we have ever seen. And they're not perfect, but compared to the past, which was just cosmetic, these have really been quite effective. They've severely constrained Putin. And clearly there's something going on with Putin and his military and his hold on power. And as I mentioned on this show before, you know, don't wish for Putin to be replaced, because the guy most likely to be next in line will make Putin seem not so bad.
Yeah. Yeah. The Wicked Witch of the West is in the offing. David, thank you so much for spending time. We'll watch for you tonight. MSNBC, Joy Reid. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.